The Hall of Thorns had never witnessed such cruelty dressed as ceremony. Sinara pressed her spine against the cold marble pillar, her fingers digging into the ancient stone as she watched her husband ascend the dais. Her heart slammed against her ribs with such force she feared the wolves below might hear it. Hundreds of them filled the great hall, their faces upturned in reverence toward the man she had loved in secret for 2 years. The man who had sworn she was his forever. Corvain stood beneath the iron chandelier, his broad shoulders rigid beneath ceremonial black leather. Torchlight carved shadows across his jaw, illuminating the face she had kissed 1,000 times in darkened chambers. Those amber eyes that had burned with passion when he whispered her name now stared ahead with glacial emptiness. Something was wrong. Sinara's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where his child grew beneath layers of servant's wool. She was not supposed to be here. Corvain had instructed her to remain in her hidden chamber until the political theater concluded. But 3 days of silence had driven her from hiding. 3 days without his voice, his touch, his reassurance. And now she understood why. The High Magistrate raised his withered hands, commanding silence from the assembled wolves of Dusk Hollow. Citizens of the realm, his voice echoed against vaulted ceilings, your Alpha King has gathered you to witness a sacred declaration. A matter of the heart and the throne. Sinara stopped breathing. This was supposed to be a trade negotiation, a meeting with the merchant guilds. That was what Corvain had told her 3 days ago, his lips pressed to her forehead in their stolen moment before dawn. I will return to you before the moon rises, he had promised, and then we will discuss how to tell the council about us, about our child. She had believed him. The crowd parted as a woman glided toward the dais. Valoria of House Caldress moved like poisoned honey, her silver gown catching the torchlight with each calculated step. Her pale hair was woven with moonstones, her lips curved in triumph. No, Sinara's nails drew blood from her palms. For too long, Corvain spoke, and his voice sounded hollow, mechanical, utterly unlike the man who had laughed against her neck just days before. I have allowed sentiment to cloud my judgment. The throne of Dusk Hollow requires strength, alliance, a queen worthy of standing beside its king. Valoria ascended the steps, her smile widening. I have been foolish, Corvain continued. His eyes swept the crowd, passing over the pillar where Sinara hid without a flicker of recognition. I allowed myself to be distracted by something beneath my station, a servant who forgot her place. The words struck Sinara like physical blows. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Sinara saw heads turning, wolves exchanging knowing glances. They knew. Somehow, everyone knew about her, about them. But that distraction has been eliminated. Eliminated. The word carved through her chest. Tonight. Corvain raised Valoria's hand. I declare my intention to take Valoria of House Caldress as my queen and mate. Let the realm witness my choice. The hall erupted in applause. Sinara could not move, could not breathe, could not process the complete annihilation of everything she had believed. He had not simply chosen another, he had denounced her. Publicly named her as something shameful to be discarded. 2 years of whispered devotion, of secret claiming bites, of promises made in moonlit gardens, reduced to a distraction beneath his station. The mark on her hip, the one he had placed with such reverence the night he swore she was his fated mate, burned with sudden agony. Sinara gasped, doubling over in the shadows. The pain radiated through her bones, as if something inside her was being torn apart. Or awakened. For a single heartbeat, darkness gathered at her fingertips. Not shadow from the unlit corridor. Something else. Something that breathed and hungered and whispered promises of ruin. She fled before she could understand what it was. The servant corridors blurred past her tear-streaked vision. Her feet knew the path to her chamber even as her mind fractured. She had to leave, had to disappear before whatever remained of her dignity was stripped away completely. Her hands shook as she gathered her few possessions. A worn cloak, a handful of coins saved over months, the dried herbs she had collected for the sickness that plagued her mornings. His child. She was carrying the child of a man who had just declared her worthless. A sob tore from her throat, but Sinara forced herself to swallow it. There would be time for breaking later. Now she needed to survive. She paused at the narrow window, looking out at the celebration bonfires being lit across the capital. Wolves howled their approval to the stars. Somewhere in that glittering hall, Corvain was accepting congratulations while Valoria basked in her stolen victory. And no one knew that the Alpha King's true mate was fleeing into the darkness with his heir growing in her womb. Sinara pulled her hood low and slipped through the servants' gate. She did not see the way Corvain's body suddenly stiffened on the dais, as if waking from a nightmare. She did not see his amber eyes flood with horrified awareness, his hand reaching toward the shadows where he had somehow felt her presence. She did not hear him whisper her name like a man discovering he had been stabbed. By the time he tore free from Valoria's grip and ran for the servants' quarters, Sinara had already vanished into the winter forest. And deep within her womb, something ancient stirred in response to its mother's anguish. The forbidden bloodline that had skipped 3 generations recognized the darkness she had unconsciously summoned. It approved. 16 weeks later, the village of Fen Hollow barely remembered it had a newcomer. Sinara had arrived during the worst blizzard in 20 winters, a half-frozen widow with a swollen belly and eyes that held too much grief for someone so young. The village elders had taken pity, offering her the abandoned cottage near the cursed woods, in exchange for her knowledge of herbs and healing. She had accepted without hesitation. The cottage was small, drafty, and far from any road that might carry royal wolves. Perfect for a woman who needed to disappear. Sinara placed another log on the fire and lowered herself carefully into the worn chair by the hearth. Her belly had grown large enough now that simple tasks left her breathless. The village midwife had commented last week that she was carrying heavy, suggesting the child might be a strong boy. Sinara did not tell her there might be more than one child moving beneath her skin. Some nights, she felt kicks from opposite sides simultaneously. Movements that seemed to respond to her emotions, to the flickering shadows that gathered in the corners when her grief became too heavy. The shadows had become a problem. At first, Sinara thought she was imagining things. A flicker of darkness at the edge of her vision. A candle flame bending away from her hand as if repelled. Small things, easily dismissed as exhaustion and heartbreak. Then one night, in the depths of a nightmare where Corvain's cold voice declared her worthless again and again, she had woken to find her entire cottage swallowed in black mist. Not smoke, not shadow cast by failing firelight. Something alive. Something that receded when she screamed and fled to the frozen light of dawn. Since then, Sinara had noticed patterns. The darkness responded to her pain. When she wept, shadows lengthened toward her as if offering comfort. When she remembered his hands on her skin, his lips against her mark, the fire dimmed and something cold brushed against her consciousness, whispering, waiting. She had heard legends of such power. The void bloodline, they called it. A corruption in the ancient wolf lineages, burned out through generations of careful breeding. Those who carried it were said to command darkness itself, to walk between life and death, to unmake their enemies with a thought. They were also said to be killed at birth if discovered. Sinara pressed her hands to her belly, where the child kicked in response to her fear. "We must keep this secret," she whispered to the darkness and to the life within her. "Both of you. Whatever you are, whatever I am becoming, no one can know." The shadows in the corners seemed to pulse with understanding. Sometimes she thought of Morrigan, the old kitchen mistress back in Dusk Hollow. The woman had been kind to Sinara during her time at the palace, sneaking her ginger tea when the morning sickness grew unbearable, pretending not to notice when she slipped away to meet Corvain in secret. Morrigan had suspected the truth about the pregnancy, Sinara was certain, but had never breathed a word. She hoped the old woman was safe, hoped the Caldress family had not punished those who had shown the disgraced servant kindness. A knock at her door made her jump. Sonara reached for the iron poker before answering. Visitors were rare, and she trusted none of them. Mistress Wren? A young voice. Isla, the tanner's daughter, who came weekly to trade candles for salvas. I bring news from the traveling merchants. Sonara cracked the door. The girl's round face was flushed with excitement, her breath puffing white in the frigid air. What news? The capital, mistress. They say the Alpha King has lost his mind. Sonara's blood turned to ice. What do you mean? Isla's eyes widened with the thrill of gossip. The merchants say he has torn apart the northern provinces searching for someone. A woman. He has offered 20,000 gold pieces for information leading to her discovery. 20,000. A fortune beyond imagining. They say crops have failed in the eastern lands because the king's wolf is out of balance. Livestock go feral. Even the palace guards whisper that he has not slept in months. Sonara gripped the doorframe to keep herself upright. Some say he has gone completely mad, Ayla continued breathlessly. That he howls at the moon every night and destroys anything that stands between him and finding this mystery woman. The Lady Valoria has been confined to her chambers. The wedding that was supposed to happen never did. The wedding never happened. Sonara's heart clenched despite everything. Despite the public humiliation, despite the words that had shattered her. Some traitorous part of her still ached at the thought of him suffering. The affairs of kings are not our concern, she managed. Thank your father for the candles. But after Ayla departed, Sonara sank into her chair with trembling legs. He was searching for her, tearing his kingdom apart to find her. Why? The man who had denounced her before the entire realm, who had called her a distraction to be eliminated. Why would he destroy everything to find her now? Unless the man she had seen that night was not truly Corvain at all. The mark on her hip flared with sudden heat, and Sonara gasped. 16 weeks, and the claiming bite had never faded. If anything, it had darkened, the scar tissue twisting into patterns that seemed almost deliberate. She had expected it to disappear within weeks of his rejection. That was what the old stories said happened when a bond was severed. But this bond did not feel severed. It felt stretched, strained, like a thread pulled to its breaking point but refusing to snap. And sometimes, in the moments between sleep and waking, she could swear she felt something through it. A searching, a desperate reaching across impossible distance. Movement outside caught her attention. Sonara moved to the frost-covered window and felt her heart stop. At the edge of the cursed woods, 3 wolves stood watching her cottage. Large, still. Their amber eyes fixed on her with predatory intelligence. They had found her. The shadows in the room gathered closer, rising like smoke from the corners, responding to her spike of terror. And in her womb, something kicked sharply enough to steal her breath, both sides at once, as if 2 small bodies were preparing for battle. Sonara did not sleep that night. She sat in her chair with the iron poker across her lap, watching the door, watching the windows, waiting for the wolves to make their move. But they remained at the tree line, motionless as statues, their eyes gleaming whenever she dared to look. Watching, waiting. For what? By dawn, they had vanished. Sonara told herself they were wild wolves, nothing more. Told herself the amber of their eyes had been a trick of moonlight. Told herself that the Alpha King's search could not possibly have extended to this forgotten village at the edge of nowhere. She almost believed it. The following morning brought more troubling whispers. The butcher's wife had heard from her cousin in Ravenford that the king had personally interrogated 3 village elders, demanding information about any pregnant women who had arrived in recent months. The blacksmith mentioned that royal soldiers had been spotted on the northern road, moving systematically through every settlement. They were getting closer. Sonara was preparing to pack her meager belongings and flee again when the knock came. This time, it was not Ayla's light tap. This was a heavy strike, firm and commanding. She grabbed her poker and approached the door. Who is there? Someone who has been searching for a very long time. A male voice, unfamiliar but carrying the rough edge of exhaustion. Please, my lady, I mean you no harm. I carry a message from the king. Sanara's breath caught. I know no king. And yet he knows you, Sanara. Her true name, spoken aloud for the first time since she had fled the capital. Her hand trembled on the latch. Running was futile. If they knew her name, they knew everything. The only choice was to face whatever had come for her. She opened the door. 3 men stood on her threshold. 2 were clearly warriors, their bulk and scarred faces marking them as the Alpha King's elite guard. But it was the 3rd man who demanded her attention. He was older, perhaps 50 winters, with iron-gray hair pulled back from a weathered face. His eyes were dark brown rather than amber, marking him as something other than pure wolf blood. And those eyes held something that stopped Sanara from raising her poker. Compassion. My lady, he said, and his voice cracked on the words. I am Hadrian, High Counselor to the Alpha King. I have traveled further than I thought possible to find you, and I bring news that will change everything you believe about the night you fled. Sanara's chin lifted. I believe my husband denounced me as worthless before the entire kingdom. I believe he declared his intention to mate another while I carried his child in secret. What could you possibly say to change that? Hadrian closed his eyes as if her words caused him physical pain. He was not your husband that night. Not truly. The High Counselor reached into his coat and withdrew a small vial filled with viscous black liquid. Do you know what this is? Sanara stared at the vial. The contents seemed to writhe in the dim light, recoiling from her gaze. Soulbane, Hadrian said, a poison so rare that its existence was thought to be legend. It does not kill the body. It kills the will. The victim becomes a puppet, speaking words they would never choose, performing actions that violate everything they hold sacred. The ground seemed to shift beneath Sanara's feet. 3 days before the ceremony, House Caldris hosted a private dinner to celebrate the upcoming trade negotiations. The wine served to the king was laced with concentrated soulbane. Hadrian's jaw tightened. For 72 hours, Corvain was a prisoner in his own body, aware of nothing, controlled completely by whoever administered the poison. That is impossible, Sanara whispered, though her heart was screaming otherwise. The effects wore off precisely 3 days after ingestion. The king woke screaming your name. Hadrian's voice roughened. He remembered nothing of the ceremony, nothing of the declaration. The first thing he did was run to your chamber. And when he found it empty, when he realized you had witnessed everything and fled believing it was real, he did not need to finish. Sanara's legs would not hold her. She stumbled backward, catching herself on the table as 16 weeks of grief and rage reorganized themselves around this new truth. Corvain had not betrayed her. He had been violated, stripped of his will and forced to perform a rejection he never intended. And she had run, taking his child with her, leaving him to wake in a nightmare of his own making. He has not slept more than fragments since that night. Hadrian continued softly. He has not touched Valoria, has not spoken to her, except to demand she confess her family's involvement. The kingdom suffers because his wolf has been tearing at his sanity, searching for the mate bond that should have been complete. The mark on her hip burned with familiar heat. He feels that, Hadrian said. Every time your mark responds, he feels an answering fire. It is the only proof he has that you still live. Sanara pressed her palm to her belly, where the child had gone completely still, as if listening. Why tell me this now? She demanded. Why search for so long instead of sending word immediately? Hadrian's expression darkened. He reached into his coat again and withdrew a folded letter. The seal was broken, but Sanara could see the serpent crest of House Caldris pressed into black wax. We intercepted this 1 week ago. It was meant for agents already deployed. She took the letter with numb fingers. The message was brief. The vessel has been located. Terminate before the new moon. Leave no trace. The true queen must never complicate the succession. Sanara read it twice before the meaning penetrated. Assassins, she breathed. Valoria's family cannot afford for you to return, Hadrian said grimly. A living mate carrying the true heir would destroy everything they sacrificed to achieve. They have sent their best hunters. We do not know how many or how close they are. The shadows in the room began to stir. Sinara felt them responding to her fear, her rage, her overwhelming grief at everything that had been stolen from both her and Corvain. The darkness gathered at the edges of her vision, pressing closer, offering itself. Hadrian's eyes widened. He stepped back, his hand moving instinctively to his belt. "My lady," he said carefully. "Your eyes?" Sinara caught her reflection in the window glass. The warm brown of her irises had been swallowed by something else. Something that swirled with void and stars and hungry darkness. The forbidden bloodline was waking. Before she could respond, a howl split the morning air. Close, filled with warning. Hadrian spun toward the door. "They have found us." Through her window, Sinara saw shapes moving between the trees. Not the amber-eyed watchers from the night before. These wolves were different. Darker. Moving with coordinated precision. And behind them, stepping from the shadows with a crossbow already raised, came a figure in black, whose face was hidden behind a bone-white mask. The Caldrus assassins had arrived, and they had brought an army. The first crossbow bolt shattered Sinara's window before she could draw breath. Hadrian moved with speed that defied his age, shoving her toward the back of the cottage as glass exploded across the floor. The two guards burst through the front door, their bodies already shifting mid-stride, human forms dissolving into massive wolves that lunged toward the tree line. "The cellar," Hadrian commanded. "Now." "There is no escape from the cellar," Sinara gasped, one hand pressed to her belly where the child had begun to kick with frantic urgency. "You only need to survive until he arrives." Another bolt punched through the wooden wall, embedding itself inches from Sinara's shoulder. She could see the dark liquid glistening on its tip. Poison. They were not trying to capture her. They wanted her dead. Quickly and cleanly, before anyone could intervene. A howl of agony erupted from outside. Then silence. Hadrian's jaw tightened. "One of ours." "How many did they send?" Sinara demanded. "More than we anticipated." The High Counselor drew a long blade from his belt, the steel edge gleaming with silver inlay. "The Caldrus family does not make mistakes twice. They know what happens if you reach the king alive." Through the ruined window, Sinara could see shapes converging on her cottage. 7 wolves, perhaps 8, their dark forms moving with predatory coordination, and behind them, 2 more masked figures had emerged from the forest, crossbows tracking toward her position. She was not going to survive this. The realization struck her with strange clarity. She was pregnant, untrained in combat, and surrounded by professional killers. Hadrian was skilled, but he was one man against an army. The guards were already down. Help was too far away. She was going to die here, in this forgotten cottage, and her child would die with her. Unless... The shadows in the room had been gathering since the first bolt struck. Sinara could feel them pressing against her consciousness, whispering in a language older than words, offering power, offering salvation, offering revenge. All she had to do was accept. "Hadrian," she said quietly, "get behind me." The High Counselor turned, confusion creasing his weathered face. "My lady, you cannot. Get behind me, now." Something in her voice made him obey. Sinara stepped toward the shattered window. The masked assassins saw her and raised their crossbows. The wolves paused, uncertain, their formation breaking as instinct warred with training. She reached for the darkness. It came to her like water rushing to fill an empty vessel. Cold and vast and ancient, flooding through her veins, pooling behind her eyes, spilling from her fingertips in tendrils of pure void. The shadows in her cottage rose like living things, swirling around her body in a cocoon of darkness that devoured the light. The assassins fired. The bolts disintegrated 3 feet from her face, consumed by shadows that hungered for anything that threatened their mistress. For a moment, silence. Then Sinara opened her eyes, and they were no longer brown. They were windows into endless night, swirling with stars that had died before the world was born. You came to kill me, she said, and her voice carried harmonics that vibrated in the bones of everyone present. You came to kill my child. Let me show you what that choice has cost you. She raised her hand. The darkness obeyed. Shadows erupted from the earth like geysers of black flame, engulfing the nearest wolves in cocoons of absolute void. Their howls of terror cut off abruptly as the darkness consumed them, leaving nothing behind but silence. The remaining attackers scattered, their coordination shattering as primal fear overrode their training. But Sonara was not finished. The power sang in her blood, demanding more, demanding revenge for every tear she had shed, every night she had spent alone, every moment she had believed herself worthless and abandoned. The void wanted to consume everything that had ever hurt her, wanted to reduce House Caldrus to dust and memory, wanted to... Sonara. Hadrian's voice cut through the darkness. The child. She looked down. Her belly was glowing with faint golden light, a warmth that pushed back against the hungry void surrounding her. The baby was fighting the darkness, refusing to let its mother be consumed by the very power that was saving them. Sonara gasped and released her grip on the shadows. The darkness receded like an ocean tide, pulling back into the corners and crevices of the world. The terrible void in her eyes faded, leaving behind the warm brown that Corvain had once compared to autumn honey. She collapsed to her knees, exhausted beyond anything she had ever experienced. Hadrian caught her before she struck the floor. My lady, can you hear me? The assassins, she managed. Those who survived have fled. Hadrian's voice was strange, awed, terrified. What you did? I have heard legends, but I never believed. I do not understand it myself. Sonara's hand moved to her belly, where the golden glow had faded but the warmth remained. The child stopped me, pulled me back before I lost myself completely. Before Hadrian could respond, a sound split the evening air. A howl, but not like the others. This one resonated in Sonara's bones, vibrated through the mark on her hip, set every nerve in her body alight with recognition. He was here. The forest exploded as something massive crashed through the undergrowth. Trees splintered, the ground shook. The remaining assassin wolves scattered like leaves before a hurricane. And then he emerged. A wolf larger than any she had ever seen burst into the clearing, his fur dark as a moonless sky, his eyes blazing with molten gold. The raw power radiating from him bent the air itself, making lesser creatures cower and flee. Blood coated his muzzle from battles fought on the journey here. His claws had carved furrows in the frozen earth with each thundering stride. The Alpha King had arrived. Corvain's wolf form stalked through the carnage of the battlefield, searching for threats. Finding none, those burning golden eyes fixed on the cottage, on the shattered window, on the woman kneeling in the ruins with shadows still clinging to her skin. He shifted between one heartbeat and the next. One moment, a monster of fur and fang. The next, a man falling to his knees in the bloody snow, his hands reaching toward her with desperate reverence. Sonara. Her name broke on his lips. Sonara, please. Please tell me I am not too late. She should hate him. 16 weeks of believing he had thrown her away. 16 weeks of crying herself to sleep with her hands pressed to his child. 16 weeks of wondering if everything they had shared was a lie. But when Sonara looked at Corvain kneeling before her, his amber eyes bright with tears, his powerful body trembling with barely contained emotion, she could not find hatred. Only grief. Only relief. Only a love that had never truly died, no matter how hard she had tried to bury it. You came, she whispered. I never stopped searching. Corvain's voice was raw, broken, as if he had been screaming for months. Every day, every moment. My wolf has been clawing at my sanity, trying to find you. If I had known what they did, if I had been able to fight it. I know. Sonara cut off his anguished explanation. Hadrian told me about the Soulbane. I know it was not your choice. Something in Corvain's expression shattered. Relief? Perhaps. Or the releasing of a guilt he had carried since waking from the poison's grip. His eyes dropped to her belly, and she watched his breath catch. Our child? He breathed. Perhaps children. Sonara placed her hand over the swell where the baby had finally calmed. I feel movement from different places sometimes. Corvain made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. His hand reached toward her stomach, then stopped, hovering inches away. May I? The question broke something in Sonara's chest. The most powerful wolf in 3 kingdoms, asking permission to touch his own child. She took his hand and pressed it to her belly. The response was immediate. A kick, strong and sure, directly against his palm. Then another from the opposite side, as if 2 small bodies were greeting their father simultaneously. Corvain's composure crumbled completely. Tears tracked down his face as he bent his head, pressing his forehead to her stomach. I am sorry, he whispered against her dress. I am so sorry for what they made me say, what they made you witness. I would have torn my own heart out before speaking those words willingly. Sonara's hand moved to his hair, fingers threading through the dark strands she had missed so desperately. I believed them. When you said I was beneath you, that I was a distraction to be eliminated, I believed every word. Corvain flinched as if she had struck him. During those endless weeks of exile, I convinced myself that everything between us was a lie, that I was foolish to think a servant could ever truly hold the heart of a king. Her voice cracked. Do you know what that did to me? He looked up at her, golden eyes bright with anguish. I can only imagine, and it destroys me that you suffered alone while I was tearing apart the kingdom trying to find you. I was ready to hate you forever, to raise this child never knowing its father. To disappear so completely that you would eventually forget I existed. I would never have forgotten. Corvain's voice hardened with fierce certainty. If it took 1,000 years, I would still be searching. The bond between us is not something that can be erased by poison or politics or time itself. The mark on Sonara's hip flared with heat, and she felt his answering pulse through the connection that had never truly broken. The darkness, Corvain said quietly, his eyes searching her face. Hadrian's wolves reported what you did to the assassins. The void power. Sonara stiffened. Here it was. The moment when he would recoil from the monster she was becoming. The forbidden bloodline, she said flatly. I did not know I carried it until the night I fled. It has been growing stronger ever since. I cannot fully control it. She waited for the fear, the disgust, the calculation about whether his mate had become too dangerous to keep. Instead, Corvain lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Then we will learn to control it together. Whatever you are becoming, Sonara, you are still mine. Still my mate. Still the mother of my children and the queen my kingdom has been denied for too long. His golden eyes burned with unwavering devotion. The Caldrus family tried to steal everything from us. Our bond, our child, my very will. I will not allow them to make you fear yourself as well. A sob escaped Sonara's throat. She had built such careful walls around her heart during her time in exile, preparing for rejection, for disappointment, for another betrayal. But Corvain was dismantling those walls with every word, every touch, and every look of desperate adoration. I was going to destroy them all, she admitted. When the darkness came, I wanted to consume everyone who had ever hurt me. If the child had not pulled me back, then I would have found a way to save you. Corvain pulled her into his arms, cradling her against his chest as if she were something infinitely precious. As you will save me when my wolf threatens to take control, as we will save each other, always, for the rest of our lives. Hadrian's voice interrupted them. My king, we need to move. Corvain's arms tightened around Sonara. A moment. We do not have a moment. The High Counselor's tone was grim. The assassins who fled, they will report back to House Caldrus. They will tell Valoria that the Queen lives, that she carries heirs, and that she possesses power that could unmake their entire bloodline. Let them report, Corvain growled. Let them understand exactly what awaits them when I return. That is precisely the problem. Hadrian stepped closer, his expression grave. We received a falcon an hour ago. While you were hunting the queen, the Caldrus forces moved on the capital. Corvain went rigid. They have taken the palace. Lord Eldric Caldrus has declared himself regent, claiming your obsessive search for a servant girl proves you are unfit to rule. Lady Vailoria has been crowned queen in your absence. The temperature in the clearing dropped 20 degrees as Corvain's rage erupted. They dare? They have hostages, Hadrian continued relentlessly. Every servant who remained loyal, every guard who refused to bend. They are to be executed at dawn tomorrow. 43 souls, including Morrigan, the kitchen mistress who helped the queen during her time at the palace. Morrigan, the old woman who had snuck Senara ginger tea for her morning sickness, who had pretended not to notice when she slipped away to meet Corvain in secret, who had wept when she learned about the child. No, Senara breathed. She pulled back from Corvain's embrace, her exhaustion forgotten. The darkness stirred in her chest, responding to her surge of protective fury. We cannot let them die, she said fiercely. They are innocent. They are condemned only because they were kind to me. Corvain looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. Pride, she realized. Pride and love and fierce determination. Then we go to war, he said. Tonight. Now. Before the dawn takes what remains of our people. He turned to Hadrian. How many wolves traveled with me? 60. But more are coming. When word spreads that the queen has been found, every loyal pack in the realm will rally. We do not have time to wait for them. Corvain helped Senara to her feet, his hand staying on her belly, as if he could not bear to break contact. 60 wolves and whatever power my mate commands will have to be enough. Senara met his golden eyes. Together? Corvain pressed his forehead to hers, and through the bond, she felt his absolute conviction, his readiness to burn the world for her, his determination to never let her face anything alone again. Together, he promised. Always. Now let us take back our throne and show House Caldrus exactly what happens when they threaten the Alpha Queen. They rode through the night. Senara sat before Corvain on his great black warhorse, his arms wrapped around her waist, his body shielding her from the bitter wind. She had protested at first, arguing that her condition made riding dangerous, that she would slow them down. Corvain had simply lifted her onto the saddle and silenced her objections with a look. My wolf cannot bear to have you out of reach, he had said, his voice rough with emotion. Those weeks of separation nearly broke us both. I will not lose sight of you again until our enemies are ash, and our bond is complete. So Senara had relented, leaning back against his chest and feeling his heartbeat against her spine. The child seemed to approve of the arrangement, settling into peaceful stillness for the first time in weeks. As they rode, Corvain told her everything. He described waking from the Soulbane's grip to find Valoria in his chambers, attempting to complete a union he had no memory of accepting. The horror that had flooded through him when he realized what had been done, throwing her from his rooms and ordering her confined while he ran, still disoriented and confused, to find his true mate. He told her about the empty chamber, the abandoned cloak, the single hair ribbon she had left behind, which he had carried next to his heart every day since. He described the search that had consumed his every waking moment. The sleepless nights. The wolves sent to every corner of the kingdom. The way his control had deteriorated until his own advisors feared to be in the same room with him. They thought I was going mad, he admitted, his breath warm against her hair. Perhaps I was. My wolf knew you were alive, knew the bond still existed, but I could not find you. Every day without you felt like dying slowly. Senara's hand covered his where it rested on her belly. I felt it too. The mark that would not fade. The dreams where you came to me. Corvain stiffened. You dreamed of me? Every night. You would appear in my chamber, tell me you loved me, and swear you would find me. I thought I was imagining things, going mad with grief. Those were not dreams. His voice was hoarse. When I slept, my wolf would reach for you through the bond. I thought I was only imagining it. But if you actually felt... He broke off, overcome. Sinara turned her head to look at him. In the silver moonlight, she could see the hollows under his eyes, the gauntness in his cheeks. Months of suffering carved into every line of his face. We have both paid for House Caldress's treachery, she said softly. Now they will pay as well. The bond between them pulsed with shared determination. They reached the outskirts of Dusk Hollow as dawn painted the sky in shades of blood and gold. The capital spread before them, its ancient spires reaching toward the heavens. But something was terribly wrong. Smoke rose from several districts. The distant sound of screaming reached their ears. And on the great banner that flew above the palace gates, the snarling wolf of Corvain's bloodline had been replaced by the silver serpent of House Caldress. No, Hadrian breathed from his horse beside them. They have moved faster than we anticipated. Corvain's arm tightened around Sinara as a growl built in his chest. They have taken my home. Look at the square. Sinara pointed to the great plaza before the palace. They have constructed something. A wooden platform stood in the center of the square. Even from this distance, they could see the rows of figures kneeling upon it, their hands bound, their heads bowed. The hostages. And standing before them, resplendent in a silver gown that caught the rising sun, was Valoria. A horn sounded from the city walls. They had been spotted. Seconds later, a rider emerged from the gates, galloping toward them at reckless speed. One of Corvain's scouts, his face pale with fear. My king, he gasped, reining his horse to a halt. Lord Caldress controls the palace and the garrison. He has declared you a traitor to the realm, corrupted by obsession with a servant girl. The noble houses are divided, half supporting him out of fear, half waiting to see which way the wind blows. And the hostages? Sinara demanded. The scout's expression grew grimmer. To be executed publicly within the hour, Lord Caldress claims it will demonstrate what happens to those who remain loyal to a deposed king. Deposed, Corvain snarled. I will show them deposed. There is more. The scout hesitated. Lady Valoria has announced that she carries the king's heir. She claims the union was consummated before you left to pursue your delusion. Sinara felt Corvain's entire body go rigid with fury. That is a lie, he said, his voice deadly quiet. I have not touched her. I would sooner cut off my own hand than... I know. Sinara turned in the saddle to face him. I know, Corvain. But the realm does not. They see a queen claiming to carry your child while your true mate hides in the shadows. Then we will show them the truth. Corvain's golden eyes blazed with determination. No more hiding. No more shadows. You will enter that city at my side, and every wolf in Dusk Hollow will know exactly who carries the legitimate heirs to my throne. Sinara looked toward the distant platform where 43 innocent people waited to die. Where Morrigan, the woman who had shown her kindness when she had nothing, knelt with a blade hanging over her neck. The darkness stirred in her chest, offering its power, offering destruction, offering revenge. But this time, Sinara did not fear it. Together, she said. Corvain pressed his lips to her forehead. Together. He turned to address the 60 wolves assembled behind them. House Caldress believes they have won. They believe their treachery and their poison have secured them a throne they never deserved. His voice carried across the assembled warriors. They are wrong. Today, we take back what is ours. Today, we show the traitors what happens when they threaten the true Alpha Queen and the heirs she carries. Today, we remind them why the wolves of Dusk Hollow do not kneel to serpents. A howl rose from the assembled wolves, 60 voices joining in a chorus of fury and loyalty. For the Queen, Corvain roared. For the Queen, the wolves answered, and then they charged. But as the army surged toward the gates, as Corvain urged his horse forward with Sinara held close against his heart, neither of them saw the figure watching from the highest tower. Neither of them saw Valoria's cold smile as she observed their approach, and neither of them heard her whispered command to the hooded figure beside her. Wait until they reach the square, wait until they think they have won, and then show them what true power looks like. The trap had been set, and they were riding directly into it. The battle for the gates was brutal, but brief. Corvain's wolves hit the Caldrus defenders like a storm of fur and fang. The garrison soldiers, many of whom had served the true king for years, hesitated at the sight of their alpha leading the charge. That hesitation cost them everything. Within minutes, the gates lay in splinters. Within an hour, the outer districts had fallen. But as Corvain's forces pushed toward the central square, the resistance stiffened. House Caldrus had positioned their most loyal warriors around the execution platform, forming a wall of steel and claw between the king and his captured people. Sinara rode at Corvain's side, her hands gripping his arms as they surveyed the scene before them. The square was packed with civilians, some cheering the king's return, others cowering in fear of what the battle might bring. And at the center of it all, on the raised wooden platform, 43 hostages knelt with blades at their throats. Valoria stood before them like a queen from a nightmare, her silver gown pristine despite the chaos surrounding her. Lord Eldric Caldrus flanked her, his aged face twisted with fury at the sight of his carefully laid plans crumbling. Corvain! Valoria's voice carried across the square with unnatural clarity. How touching that you have brought your little servant to witness this moment. Corvain dismounted, lifting Sinara down beside him. His wolves formed a protective circle around them, but he made no move to attack. Release the hostages, Valoria. This ends now. Ends. Valoria laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. Oh, my dear false king, this is only beginning. Did you truly think I would let you take back what I have worked so hard to steal? Her hand moved in a subtle gesture. From the shadows of the surrounding buildings, figures emerged. Not wolves, not soldiers. Something else entirely. They wore robes of deepest black, their faces hidden behind masks of polished obsidian. Their movements were wrong, too fluid, too synchronized, as if controlled by a single mind. And from their outstretched hands, tendrils of dark energy writhed like living serpents. Void wielders. Sinara's blood turned to ice. Did you think your bloodline was the only one to carry the forbidden gift? Valoria's smile widened. House Caldrus has been collecting those touched by the void for generations, nurturing them, training them, waiting for the moment when their power would be needed. She raised her hand, and the void wielders raised theirs in response. Kill everyone except the servant girl. I want her to watch her king die before I take her head myself. The void wielders attacked. Darkness erupted across the square in a wave of consuming shadow. The tendrils moved like living things, wrapping around throats and limbs, squeezing the breath from anyone they touched. The acrid smell of burning flesh filled the air as the void ate through armor and skin alike. Corvain's wolves scattered, howling in agony as the darkness seared their fur and left smoking wounds. Civilians screamed and fled in all directions, trampling each other in their desperation to escape. The careful formation protecting Sinara shattered in an instant. Corvain shifted mid-stride, his massive black wolf form lunging toward the nearest void wielder. His jaws closed around the robed figure's arm, bones crunching like dry twigs, but the dark energy wrapped around him like chains of living shadow, dragging him to the ground. He snarled and thrashed, muscles straining against bonds that tightened with every movement. For every tendril he tore free with claws that struck sparks against the unnatural darkness, two more took its place, coiling around his throat and chest until his breathing became labored gasps. Corvain! Sinara screamed. She ran toward him, but hands seized her from behind, two Caldrus soldiers, their grips like iron manacles, dragging her toward the platform where Valoria waited with triumph blazing in her pale eyes. Bring her to me, Valoria commanded. Let her kneel where she belongs. Sinara fought with everything she had, kicking and clawing and biting, but her pregnant body was no match for trained warriors. They forced her up the wooden steps, splinters digging into her palms as she tried to resist, past the terrified hostages whose faces were streaked with tears, until she knelt at Valoria's feet. The false queen reached down and gripped Sanara's chin, her nails digging into soft flesh hard enough to draw blood, forcing her to watch the square below. "Look at him," Valoria hissed, her breath hot against Sanara's ear. "Your mighty Alpha King, brought low by power he could never understand. Did you truly believe love would save you? That your pathetic bond would overcome centuries of planning?" In the square, Corvain had stopped struggling. The void tendrils had wrapped so completely around his wolf form that he could barely breathe, his chest heaving in desperate, shallow gasps. His golden eyes found Sanara's across the distance, and she saw something in them that shattered her heart. Apology. He was apologizing for failing her. Now, Valoria drew a silver dagger from her belt, the blade gleaming with oily poison. "Let us end this farce. The servant dies first, then the king. Then I will cut those abominations from her belly and ensure no legitimate heir ever threatens my reign." The blade descended toward Sanara's throat, and the void inside her erupted. It was not like before, when she had drawn on the darkness consciously. This was instinct, survival, the desperate fury of a mother protecting her children. Shadows exploded from Sanara's body in a wave that threw Valoria backward, the false queen's scream cut short as she crashed into the wooden railing. The soldiers holding her disintegrated, their bodies unraveling into wisps of black smoke, their death screams swallowed by the hungry void. The platform beneath her feet cracked and splintered as darkness poured from her in an endless tide, spreading across the square like a living flood. But she did not lose herself this time. The children, their golden warmth anchored her to sanity. She could feel them guiding the power, shaping it like a river through channels, preventing the void from consuming everything in its path. Sanara rose to her feet, and she was no longer a servant. No longer a victim. No longer a woman who had spent months hiding from her own strength. She was something else entirely. Her eyes blazed with void and starlight, twin windows into the space between worlds. Shadows wreathed her body like a living cloak, moving with her breath, responding to her will. And when she spoke, her voice resonated with harmonics that made even the void wielders falter, their concentration breaking as primal fear overrode their training. "You wanted power?" she said to Valoria, who was scrambling backward across the platform, her silver gown torn and stained with blood. "Let me show you what power truly looks like." Sanara raised her hand. The darkness in the square responded, but not to attack. Instead, it turned on its masters. The void wielders screamed as their own power reversed, consuming them from within. Their bodies convulsed as the shadows they had commanded turned traitor, eating through their robes and flesh and bone. One by one they collapsed, leaving nothing but smoking husks in obsidian masks. The tendrils holding Corvain dissolved into nothing, freeing him to rise on shaking legs. The shadows that had been weapons became chains, wrapping around every Kaldra soldier in the square and holding them immobile, suspended in cocoons of darkness that tightened whenever they struggled. Sanara walked toward Valoria, each step leaving prints of darkness on the wooden platform, footprints that seemed to sink into another dimension entirely. "You poisoned my mate, made him betray me against his will, hunted me across 3 kingdoms while I carried his children, tried to murder innocent people whose only crime was showing me kindness." Sanara's voice dropped to a whisper more terrifying than any roar. "Did you truly think there would be no reckoning?" Valoria's composure finally shattered. Tears streaked through the powder on her face as she fell to her knees. "Please," she begged, "please, I will give you anything. The throne, the kingdom, my father's wealth. Just let me live. You have nothing I want." Sanara stopped before the cowering woman. "Accept your confession. Tell them. Tell everyone what your family did to the king. Tell them about the Soulbane, the manipulation, the assassination attempts. Tell them the truth, and perhaps I will let you keep your life." Valoria's face contorted with hatred, a last flash of defiance. "I would rather die." "That can be arranged. A massive black wolf padded up the platform steps, blood matting his dark fur, his golden eyes burning with barely contained rage. Corvain, freed from the void's grip, stood beside his mate. He shifted to human form, naked and scarred and utterly magnificent in his fury. "You heard my queen," he said to Valoria. "Confess, or I will tear out your throat and find someone else who will." Lord Eldrick Caldress, still held immobile by shadows at the edge of the platform, his aged face gray with defeat, made a strangled sound. "Valoria, do as they say." "Father." "We have lost." The old lord's voice was hollow. "The void answers to her now. Our wielders are dead. Our soldiers are captured. If you do not confess, they will execute our entire house." For a long moment Valoria was silent. Her pale eyes darted between her father, the queen who stood wreathed in shadows, and the king whose claws were already extending in anticipation. Then, slowly, she began to speak. The confession spilled from her lips in a torrent of bitter words. The soulbane obtained from black market alchemists, the dinner where it was administered, the careful coaching of Corvain's drugged body to speak the words that would destroy his true bond, the assassination orders sent to eliminate the pregnant mate, the coup planned for years, waiting only for the right moment to strike. Every person in the square heard every word. And when she finished, weeping with humiliation and fury, Corvain turned to address his people. "You have heard the truth. House Caldress poisoned your king, attempted to murder your queen, and seized your throne through treachery and dark magic." His voice rang across the silent square. "What say you to their fate?" The answer came as a howl. Thousands of wolves, gathered in the square and beyond, lifted their voices in a chorus of condemnation. The sound shook the ancient stones of Duskhollow, resonating with generations of outrage at the violation committed against their alpha and his mate. Corvain nodded grimly. "So it shall be." He turned to Sinara, his expression softening. "But first, we have hostages to free." Together, they walked to where 43 innocent people still knelt with relief flooding their tear-streaked faces. Sinara's shadows dissolved the ropes binding their wrists while Corvain helped them to their feet one by one, speaking soft words of reassurance to each. When Sinara reached Morrigan, the old kitchen mistress was weeping openly. "My lady," Morrigan sobbed, "my queen, you came for us." Sinara helped the woman stand and pulled her into a gentle embrace. "You showed me kindness when I had nothing. Did you think I would forget? I thought we would die. I thought—" "You are safe now." Sinara pulled back to look at the woman who had smuggled her ginger tea and kept her secrets. "You are all safe, and House Caldress will never threaten anyone again." Behind them, Corvain was issuing orders. Lord Eldrick Caldress and his surviving followers were to be imprisoned pending trial. Valoria would face judgment before the assembled packs for her direct role in the poisoning and assassination attempts. But as the soldiers moved to carry out his commands, Valoria made one final desperate move. She lunged for the silver dagger she had dropped, snatching it from the platform and driving it toward Sinara's unprotected back. Sinara did not even turn around. The shadows caught Valoria's wrist an inch from her target. They tightened until bone cracked with a sound like snapping branches, and the blade clattered to the ground. "I gave you a chance to live," Sinara said quietly, still facing Morrigan. "You chose poorly." She turned, finally, to look at the woman who had caused so much suffering. "The void recognizes kinship," Sinara continued. "It showed me your wielders because their power came from the same source as mine. But there is something your family never understood about the forbidden bloodline." She stepped closer until she could see the terror swimming in Valoria's pale eyes. "The darkness does not serve those who seek to dominate. It serves those who have survived being broken. Those who have faced the abyss and refused to look away." Sinara's voice dropped to a whisper. "I have been abandoned, betrayed, hunted, and nearly murdered. I have cried until I had no tears left and kept walking anyway. The void did not choose me because of my bloodline. It chose me because I was worthy." She released Valoria's wrist, letting the woman collapse to the platform in a heap of torn silver fabric. And you never will be. Corvain moved to stand beside her, his hand finding hers. What would you have done with her? Sinara looked at the crumpled form of the woman who had stolen months of her life, who had tried to take her mate, her children, her very existence. Exile, she said finally. Strip her of her name, her wolf, her family's protection. Let her wander the frozen reaches as the nothing she always accused me of being. Corvain's eyes searched her face. That is mercy. That is justice. Sinara met his gaze steadily. Death would end her suffering. This way, she lives with the knowledge of everything she lost. Every day, she will wake knowing that a servant girl defeated her, took back what was stolen, and chose to let her live rather than dirty her hands with unworthy blood. A slow smile spread across Corvain's face. My queen, he murmured, ruthless and merciful in equal measure. Around them, the wolves of Dusk Hollow began to howl once more. But this time, the sound was not condemnation, it was celebration. Their true king and queen stood united on the platform of would-be execution, surrounded by the people they had saved and the enemies they had vanquished. And overhead, the sun finally broke through the clouds, bathing the square in golden light. The trials took 3 days. Lord Eldrick Caldris was found guilty of treason, attempted regicide, and conspiracy to commit murder. His execution was swift and public, a message to any noble house that might consider similar treachery. Valoria's sentence was carried out exactly as Sinara had decreed. The ritual that stripped her wolf was ancient and agonizing, leaving behind a hollow creature that barely resembled the triumphant false queen of days before. She was escorted to the frozen northern border and released with nothing but the clothes on her back. The last anyone heard, she was begging for scraps in a mining town that did not know her name. With House Caldris dismantled and their supporters imprisoned or executed, the kingdom began to heal. The crops that had withered during Corvain's desperate search showed new growth within days. The wolves who had gone feral, driven mad by their alpha's fractured bond, returned to their senses as peace settled over the realm. And throughout it all, Sinara stood at Corvain's side. The people of Dusk Hollow had embraced their new queen with a fervor that surprised everyone, including Sinara herself. They had witnessed her power in the square, had heard Valoria's confession of what she had endured. The servant girl who had been declared worthless was now celebrated as a symbol of resilience, of justice, of love that could not be destroyed by poison or politics. But there was one thing remaining before the healing could be complete. On the night of the full moon, 1 week after the battle in the square, Corvain led Sinara to the sacred grove at the heart of the palace grounds. Ancient oaks formed a cathedral of living wood, their branches intertwined overhead to create a canopy of silver-touched leaves. The clearing was empty except for the two of them, and the moonlight that spilled through the branches like liquid starfire. The bond between us has always been real, Corvain said, turning to face her. Since the moment my wolf first recognized you, there has been no one else. There could never be anyone else. Sinara placed her hand over the mark on her hip, feeling it pulse with warmth. But it was never completed. The ceremony we planned, the formal claiming before witnesses, we never had the chance. We have the chance now. Corvain took her hands in his amber eyes glowing with reflected moonlight. If you will still have me, after everything my weakness allowed to happen, after the pain I caused you, even unknowingly, if you can find it in your heart to... Sinara silenced him with a kiss. The bond between them roared to life, flooding through her veins like fire and starlight. She felt his soul pressing against hers, desperate for union, desperate for the completion that had been denied them for too long. When she finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. I never blamed you, she whispered. I blamed myself for believing the lies. I blamed fate for putting us in an impossible situation. But I never truly blamed you, Corvain. I loved you too much to let you go, even when I thought you had already let go of me. Corvain pressed his forehead to hers. Then let us finish what we started. Let us seal this bond so completely that nothing can ever threaten it again. He tilted his head, exposing his throat in the ancient gesture of a wolf offering himself to his mate. Claim me, he said. Make me yours forever. Sinara understood instinctively what to do. Her teeth descended to the spot where his neck met his shoulder. She felt his pulse thundering beneath her lips, strong and vital and entirely hers. She bit down. The world exploded. The bond completed with a force that drove them both to their knees. Sinara felt Corvain's essence pour into her as hers flowed into him. Every memory, every emotion, every secret corner of their hearts laid bare in a moment of absolute communion. She saw herself through his eyes, not a servant or a victim or a vessel for forbidden power. A woman of extraordinary courage who had survived betrayal and emerged stronger. A healer who had captured a king's heart with kindness and fire, a mother who had protected her children against impossible odds, a queen who had faced down her enemies and chosen justice over vengeance, the most precious soul in his existence. And through her own perspective, she saw him clearly at last. Not a king who had failed her, not a man defined by his moment of violation. She saw the warrior who had torn apart his kingdom to find her, the mate who had never stopped reaching for her through dreams and darkness, the father who had wept with joy at the first kick of his children, a man whose love burned so fiercely that poison and politics and death itself could not extinguish it. When the vision faded, they were both weeping. "My queen," Corvain breathed, pressing his hand to the fresh mark on his throat. "My king," she answered, feeling her own mark pulse in harmony with his. He helped her to her feet, then knelt before her once more. This time, he pressed his lips to her swollen belly, where two small lives stirred in response to their father's presence. "My heirs," he murmured against her dress, "are miracles." Sinara threaded her fingers through his hair, looking up at the moon that had witnessed their union. The darkness inside her was quiet now, not suppressed, but at peace. The void had become a part of her, another facet of the power that had allowed her to protect everything she loved. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Corvain rose and wrapped his arms around her. "Now we live. We rule together. We raise our children in a kingdom that knows peace because their mother had the courage to fight for it. And the void? The forbidden bloodline? Will be our children's heritage, not their curse. We will teach them to control it, to use it wisely, to never fear the darkness within them." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Because they will have something the Caldrus wielders never had." "What is that?" "Love." Corvain smiled, and it was the smile she remembered from their stolen moments before the world fell apart. Love to anchor them. Love to guide them. Love to remind them that the darkness serves the light, not the other way around. 6 weeks later, Sinara gave birth to twins, a boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's gift for shadows, who would grow to become the most powerful void wielder in 3 centuries. They named him Therion, which meant strength in the old tongue, a girl with silver-white hair and eyes that flickered between amber and starlight, who would inherit her father's throne and her mother's compassion. They named her Aurith, which meant dawn. Corvain held his children with tears streaming down his face, his battle-scarred hands impossibly gentle with the tiny lives they cradled. "Thank you," he whispered to Sinara, who lay exhausted but radiant in their bed, "for surviving, for fighting, for coming back to me when you had every reason to disappear forever." Sinara reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the claiming mark on his throat that matched the one on her hip. "I never left you," she said softly. "Not really. The bond held us together across every mile, every month, every moment of pain and doubt. I felt you searching for me. I felt you refusing to give up." She smiled, and it was the smile of a woman who had walked through hell and emerged not broken, but forged. "How could I abandon that?" Corvain leaned down to kiss her, their children nestled safely between them. Through the bond, She felt his overwhelming love, his fierce devotion, his determination to spend every remaining day of his life worthy of her. Outside their window, the wolves of Dusk Hollow lifted their voices in a howl of celebration. And in the great tapestry of the kingdom's history, a new chapter was woven. The story of a servant girl who was abandoned by her alpha husband and awakened a forbidden power. Who returned not just for revenge, but for justice. Who faced the darkness within and without, and emerged as a queen worthy of legend. She had been told she was nothing. She had proven she was everything, and she would never be abandoned again. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.